Katie picked up the last bag of groceries from the trunk of the car, balancing it on her hip. She brushed her dark hair out of her face. The unbearable heat continued to plague her. She looked at her lawn, hoping it would rain soon. She didn't like the extra expense and wastage of water for irrigation. Her husband, Phil, was very particular when it came to the lawn. At 34, Katie was more concerned about her health. She did yoga every day and went to classes twice a week. Every weekend, she and Phil ran or went hiking. Phil was much taller, 190 centimeters, and Katie barely reached 162 centimeters. She often wore high heels so as not to look so different from him, and Phil more than once said that he liked how these heels emphasized her figure. Looking across the road, Katie noticed a moving van pulling into a neighbor's yard. Finally, this house has sold, she thought. Although the economy had already recovered, the real estate market was still sluggish. As she looked, the garage door rose. A slender man with jet black hair and glasses stood in the doorway. As far as Katie could tell, he had the type of smart attractiveness that she always found irresistible. Seeing her look, the neighbor smiled and waved. Katie raised her hand in response, and then, feeling embarrassed at being caught staring, went into the house to unpack the groceries. An hour later, she had the salad ready and a couple of steaks finishing on the grill. This was her go-to dish when it was too hot to cook anything else. There was a pitcher of iced tea in the refrigerator, and she decided that would be enough for tonight. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail and braided, and she was wearing short yoga shorts and a sports top. She smiled as she felt a kiss on her bare shoulder. "Hello, beauty," a deep voice said in her ear. Phil, his blonde beard tickling her skin, returned home. He ran a successful construction business and built the house they lived in himself, as well as most of the other houses in their area. Thanks to his success, Katie was able to work part-time at the local library and devote the rest of her time to her photography and yoga. She lifted her lips for a kiss, giggling when Phil tugged at her braid. "You know I go crazy when you wear your hair like that." Katie smiled. "Oh, I know." She winked. "Go get changed. Dinner is almost ready." Just at that moment, the timer rang. Phil went into the bedroom and returned just as she was setting the steaks on the small kitchen table where they usually ate dinner together. His brown eyes met her blue ones, and a smile appeared on his face. Phil was the kind of person who smiled often and used his entire face. "I was just hoping for a steak," he said, cutting into the meat and sighing with pleasure as red juice filled his plate. "Damn, how I love meat with blood. You always make it perfect. I'm sure you just hold it over the candle and think that's enough." Katie preferred her meat medium rare, so she left it on the grill a couple of minutes longer. "I don't understand how you can eat this. It's the same as chewing a cow's tongue." "Hey," Phil said suddenly, "have you noticed that someone is moving into the house opposite?" Katie chewed and swallowed the piece of meat. "Yes, I think I saw the new owner. He was in the garage and waved to me." Phil spoke, waving his fork. "Yes, and I not only noticed, but also said hello. His name is Mike. His wife is Misty. They recently got married and just moved to our city." Phil had a habit of getting to know almost everyone in the area and remembering their names. Kathy thought it was good for business. "Misty is a doctor. She will soon start working at Memorial Hospital." He named one of the local hospitals. "And Mike is a writer." Phil waved his fork dismissively. He didn't have much respect for those who didn't work with their hands. Katie, being a photographer, was the complete opposite. But, as with many other aspects of their strange union, they managed to find common ground. "Writer, huh?" Katie smiled, and a dimple familiar to Phil appeared on her left cheek. "I can't wait to meet a neighbor who might want to talk about books." She pricked the salad with a fork and popped it into her mouth. "We need to invite them to dinner." "I've already arranged everything, baby." Phil laughed. "They will come to us for dinner on Friday evening." Phil winked at her. "And you know what? They are vegan." Katie moaned. "Damn it." She and Phil followed a paleo diet and ate a lot of meat. She walked over to the cookbook shelf and pulled out a thick volume at random. What can I cook without carbohydrates, without meat, and at the same time delicious? On Friday evening, everything was ready. Katie decided to cook Thai food. She believed that bold flavors compensated for the limitations of ingredients. The night before, she thinly sliced the tofu and marinated it in homemade sauce. Then she prepared curry and salad with coconut dressing. She also bought several bottles of wonderful Spanish wine, which she loved very much, and they were chilled in the refrigerator. She took one last look in the mirror, turning to evaluate her outfit. She was wearing a tight white denim skirt and a top that showed off her light tan. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and her makeup was minimal. She put on simple flat sandals and went to the kitchen to check on the curry. Phil returned home a few minutes before the guests arrived. "Damn, it smells so good in here," he shouted, almost running towards the bedroom. "Give me 5 minutes." As soon as he disappeared, the doorbell rang. Katie wiped her hands on the towel she'd been washing dishes on and opened the door. The man she had seen in the garage was standing in the doorway. Seeing him up close, Katie was convinced of her first impression. He was tall, although not as tall as Phil. Katie guessed that he was about 180 to 182 centimeters tall. He wore glasses, had warm brown eyes and dark hair, and his cheekbones resembled those usually seen in the pages of fashion magazines. However, his appearance was more attractive than frightening. Katie chuckled to herself. If Harry Potter's father could come back to life, this is what he would look like. Mike smiled. "Hello, you must be Katie. Sorry, Misty is a little late. She'll be there soon." Katie remembered her manners and extended her hand. "Hello, I'm Katie. Come in." She led him into the house towards the kitchen. Mike, taking a breath of air, remarked with pleasure, "Is this Thai food? For the life of me, I love Thai food." Katie laughed. "I'll wait until you try my food before I decide whether to kill you or not." She lifted the lid of the curry to stir it. "Do you want to try?" She held out a wooden spoon. Mike came closer and, with his lips parted, leaned towards the spoon. She gave him some curry, and his groan of approval was the best reward. "I changed my mind, Katie. Don't kill me. Divorce your husband and marry me," he said with a smile. "I heard it." Phil laughed, walking into the kitchen. He and Mike shook hands. "Good to see you, friend. Glad you came." Phil looked around. "Where is the wife?" "On duty at the hospital," Mike said regretfully. "If you get to know us better, you'll get used to it." Misty is the kind of person who believes that no one can take better care of her patients than herself. She is very dedicated to her work. I am, of course, proud of her, but it greatly affects our social life. Katie tried to diffuse any possible tension. "Well, there's no reason not to start the evening right now." She went to the refrigerator and took out a bottle of chilled wine. "Phil, can you get the glasses? We can try this." She turned to Mike. "We follow a paleo diet, so wine is a little indulgence for us." Mike took the glass from Phil and handed it to Katie to fill. Raising his glass, he said, "For pleasure," clinking glasses with her and looking intently into her eyes. An understanding arose between them, that moment when a man considers a woman attractive, and the woman admits it. Katie slowly brought the glass to her lips, letting the wine linger on the edge, never taking her eyes off Mike. She finally took a sip, but left the glass at her lips, wondering who was standing in front of her. Phil intervened. "I support it," he said enthusiastically. Phil enthusiastically clinked his glass with Mike, breaking the momentary moment. Katie shook her head subtly, as if shaking off some kind of obsession. She quickly got to work preparing dinner, pouring the curry into bowls. "Will you call your wife?" she asked, just as the doorbell rang. "Saved by the bell," Phil exclaimed joyfully and went to open the door. Standing in the doorway was a tall woman with short blonde hair curling playfully around her ears. Its natural beauty immediately brought to mind sunny California. She looked embarrassed that she was late. "Hi, I'm Misty," she said with a husky voice. "Sorry for being late, you must be Phil." She extended her hand with that confident but gentle movement that doctors seem to have been perfecting for years. "Come in," Phil said, putting his arm around her and leading her inside. Let's go meet my wife. He led her into the kitchen. Misty, this is Katie. All thanks to her for dinner, I don't know how to cook. He offered her a bottle of wine. Will you drink with us? Misty scrunched her face in slight regret. I would love to, but I have an early call tomorrow morning. Mike sighed. Misty, my God, I thought it was your weekend. Misty looked both guilty and defensive. Dr. Mitchell's wife gave birth. He went on maternity leave early. There was no one else to replace me, and I was new, so I had to agree. Phil nodded in understanding. Well, we have to do what we need to do. I also often experience force majeure at work. Construction is not as predictable as it might seem. Misty nodded in agreement. I decided a long time ago that my patients will always be my priority. As it was in the old days, when one doctor traveled around the entire district in a cart. I don't want to turn medicine into commerce. I want to help people. Katie felt that this topic was painful for the new neighbors and hastened to change it. Well, let's have dinner, she said with deliberate cheerfulness. She gave Phil a look, which he immediately understood. It was the same look that meant that it was time to show the guests to the dining room. Phil led them into a rarely used room where plates were already set. Katie returned to the kitchen to get some wine, then sat down at the table with the others. Mike, I heard you are a writer. What kind of things do you write? Dinner went pretty smoothly. Katie quickly realized that she had little in common with Misty, and if it weren't for Mike, she would have considered the evening a failure. Phil, on the other hand, enjoyed the conversation on professional topics. He clearly enjoyed discussing career issues with Misty, who, despite her busy schedule, turned out to be an interesting conversationalist in this regard. Katie found more common interests with Mike, discussing his writing, art, music, and other creative topics. By the time their new neighbors left, Katie felt like she had found a true friend in Mike. Her first impressions were confirmed. Mike worked from home, so he and Katie often spent time together. He was open to trying yoga, and Katie enjoyed their rides to and from classes together. They also often went for walks in the local park, Mike taking his laptop with him to write and Katie taking photos of the area. She would then send him her best photos, and he would give her honest feedback. He attended a small liberal arts college and took several art courses, so his opinion was valuable to her. Gradually, she noticed that her photography style changed depending on his assessments. Their friendship continued to develop. Mike once complimented her on her hair, and from then on she began to repeat it whenever they were going to meet. She began cooking more vegan dishes, gradually mastering this style of eating. She still cooked steak for Phil, but increasingly opted for beans, tofu, and other plant-based sources of protein. As for Phil, he didn't seem to mind his wife's new friendship. A new expression appeared in his vocabulary: it's just Mike. Everyone from his mother to the hairdresser mentioned seeing Katie with another man in town or in the park. It's just Mike, he answered with a smile. He described his relationship with Mike as friendly. By the way, he even liked communicating with Misty even more, although her presence was rare. Time passed, summer gave way to autumn. It was one of those rare days in the Midwest where the morning was warm and then cooled in the evening. Phil went to work in another city, and Katie was left at home alone. She found out that Misty was on duty and decided to invite Mike over just to hang out. There was a large fireplace in their living room, and they had a supply of firewood. On impulse, Katie asked Mike to light the fire. Mike knelt in front of the fireplace. I know I'm a man, and in theory, my DNA should tell me how to do this, but I have absolutely no idea. Katie laughed. It's not that difficult. She took several small logs and laid them out with some kindling paper. She folded several sheets of newspaper and handed one to Mike. I knight you, Sir Mike of the suburbs. His eyes sparkled, and he immediately played along. Grabbing the newspaper, he twisted it and, as if holding a sword in his hands, laughed. Hey, you dirty scoundrel! He, pretending to be a duel, slammed his sword on her newspaper. Katie laughed, almost choking with laughter. You are a knight, not a pirate. You're a writer. Get into character. They played this stupid game for several minutes until Katie threw her sword into the fireplace and lit it. She then added more wood as the fire grew. Katie lay down in front of the fire, taking a glass of wine, and enjoyed the warmth and light of the fire. She turned to Mike, seeing him looking at her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, I just like looking at you," he answered quietly. Mike lay down next to her, their faces very close. "You have one of those faces, Katie. Anything you think you can see if you just take the time to look carefully." He smiled slightly. "Don't ever play strip poker with me, you'll lose straight away." Katie took another sip of wine. This was already her third glass, and she began to get a little drunk. "And you, my friend, look like Harry Potter's father." Mike laughed. "Wow." He grabbed her glass of wine, put it aside, and started tickling her. Katie screamed with laughter, hating it and enjoying it at the same time. He was thin but strong, and holding her hands with one hand, he tickled her with the other until they both realized that he was partially lying on top of her, and his mouth was inches from hers. Mike cleared his throat. "I wonder what it would be like," he said thoughtfully out loud. Katie swallowed. "What is it like?" she asked, although she already guessed what he was going to say. Mike leaned closer, his mouth so close that she could feel his breath on her lips. "I wonder what it would be like to kiss you." He paused before continuing. "We're such good friends. Will this be an extension of our friendship, or will it be something more?" Katie looked into his eyes, which reflected the light from the fire. She felt attraction, desire, wanted his kiss, and at the same time did not want it. She turned her head and looked at the wine. "I'd like another glass." She turned back and saw Mike still looking at her. He didn't move an inch. Her lips parted involuntarily. Her breath mingled with his, and her heart began to beat faster. "Are you sure we should do this, Mike? I don't want to ruin our friendship." Mike looked away, his thoughts hidden. He looked back at Katie, a wry smile on his face. "What does it say about us that you first thought about us ruining our friendships and not about our marriages?" He leaned closer. "I think we should try it at least once, just to find out." Katie raised her head slightly, as if giving an invitation. Mike saw this, accepted it, and slid his hand behind her head, then slowly lowered his head. "Last chance to change your mind, Katie." His lips touched her softly, once, twice, 3 times. Then he kissed her for real. Katie moaned. Her lips immediately parted, and her arms wrapped around his shoulders, pulling him closer to her. Mike took her tongue, and the kiss deepened. Katie had 2 thoughts. First of all, it was the most perfect first kiss she had ever had. Secondly, it wasn't like kissing teenagers when she was younger. Mike was a man, she was a woman, and their bodies understood that kissing like this usually led to sex. She rubbed her leg against his, her hips pressing against him, and she moaned as she felt his arousal press into her thigh. Finally, Mike pulled away, his breathing heavy and fast. He sighed, looking away for a moment, then looked back at his girlfriend. He sighed. "Katie, it would be better if it were bad." With a determined expression on his face, he took off his shirt. He then pulled Katie's shirt over her head. There was now only her bra between their bodies as he lowered himself back down to her, kissing her, his hand sliding down her body, finally squeezing her breast. He kissed her face, her neck, eagerly wanting her, curling around her earlobe, feeling the taste of her skin on his tongue. He discovered that her bra fastened in the front and quickly worked on the clasp. Katie watched Mike as he saw her breasts for the first time. She was proud of her body and worked hard to keep it in good shape. Her breasts were small, size 34C, but had a nice shape. Mike slowly raised his hand, as if with some hesitation, as if every second was filled with the importance of the upcoming moment. His fingers, slightly trembling with excitement, slid over her skin, touching the delicate surface of her breast. He took his time, as if trying to remember every detail. His thumb gently touched her nipple, teasing it slightly, as if Mike was just starting a game where there was no rush. It was both a gentle and sensual movement, but there was nothing overt or intrusive about it, just the natural development of an intimacy that had existed between them for years, but was only now beginning to emerge. Katie felt her body respond, as if every cell came to life with a simple touch. She couldn't help the quiet sigh that escaped her lips, as if it was the most natural thing that could happen. It wasn't the gasp of surprise or fear, it was the sound that comes out when expectations finally meet reality. Mike's name fell from her lips like a whisper, as if saying it was the most important thing in the world. Her hips moved closer to him of their own accord, as if her body had a life of its own, responding to his every movement. She felt something begin to burn inside her, not the fire of passion, but rather the flame that ignites from the feeling of long-awaited intimacy with a person you know as yourself, but never realized how much you need him. Her fingers, almost instinctively, climbed into Mike's thick dark hair, touching his head with such trepidation as if she was afraid that if she let go, everything would disappear like a dream. Every second spent nearby only increased her excitement. With every passing second, Katie felt her thoughts dissolving into what was happening between them. She could no longer think about anything else, only about what was happening now and what she was feeling. Her heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it might break out and break out. She felt the warmth spreading throughout her body and could not understand how much longer she could withstand this tension. Everything inside her said that she needed more, but at the same time she was afraid that if Mike stopped, something important that was finally starting to happen would stop. Mike seemed to sense her condition. His movements remained slow and confident, but at the same time careful, as if he did not want to force things, realizing how important this moment was. He was like a conductor, leading an orchestra. Every gesture, every touch was thoughtful, but at the same time intuitive. He knew when to move forward and when to stop, to give them both the opportunity to enjoy what was happening. It seemed as if time had slowed down. As Mike leaned over her, his lips began to send light, almost imperceptible kisses along her body. They were so soft that each of them was like a breath of wind that barely touched her skin but left a deep mark. Katie couldn't help but respond to this. Her breathing became more frequent, her body began to tremble with each new touch, as if she was enveloped by invisible energy. Finally, Mike, seeing her condition, decided not to wait any longer. He slowly but surely helped her take off her clothes, taking his time, as if each gesture was part of a ritual that they had been waiting for a long time. Every time his fingers touched her skin, it felt like a small shock that passed through her body. When Katie was finally naked, she felt vulnerable, but also confident that Mike would never do anything to make her feel uncomfortable. Their eyes met, and at that moment Katie realized that there was no turning back now. Mike, without taking his eyes off her face, also got rid of his clothes. It was not just a physical act, it was like a symbol that there were no longer any barriers between them, no clothes, no emotions. They were naked not only physically, but also emotionally, each of them ready to show the other all their vulnerability. This was the moment when all the masks were taken off, and they could be who they really are. When their bodies finally touched without any barriers, Katie felt everything in her stop for a moment. It was more than just the intimacy of two people. It was like a moment when two worlds finally touched after a long wait. Their breaths mingled, and each breath was like a new chapter in their story. Mike smiled, looking at her, and his gaze was full of tenderness and warmth. He extended his hand to her, inviting her to come closer, as if telling her without words that she could trust him, that they would cope together with everything that lay ahead. Katie just smiled in response, her heart breaking from the feelings overwhelming her. She slowly walked towards him, their hands intertwined, and for a moment it seemed as if the whole world had stopped, leaving them alone with what was between them. Her touches on him were as careful as his, as if she was afraid that if she did something wrong, this moment would disappear and they would go back to the way they were before. But with each new movement, her confidence grew, and she felt more and more that this was what they were both waiting for, this rapprochement that had been in the air for a long time, but only now took its form. When Mike leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't just any kiss. It was a promise that their connection was not just physical, it was something much deeper. His every movement was permeated with tenderness, but also with passion that they could no longer contain. It was like a long-awaited awakening when each of them finally realized that true intimacy is not only touching, but also the trust that is born between two people who have walked side by side for a long time, but have never crossed the line where it begins. Something more. Mike felt how she responded to his caresses, how her breathing quickened with each of his touches, how her body gave in to him, opening with each new kiss. But he was in no hurry. He knew this moment was special, and he wanted to make it last as long as possible. They both deserved to be completely immersed in what was happening between them. When their movements finally became more confident, Katie felt that she could no longer control her emotions. Her hands gripped his shoulders tightly, as if she wanted to hold on to this moment for as long as possible, not letting it end. Mike, in turn, gently ran his hand over her face, looking into her eyes with such tenderness that it took her breath away. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper, as if it was not a question, but an invitation to a world where only the two of them could be. Katie nodded, her lips twitching into a faint smile, and she felt their bodies move closer again. Mike and Katie switched positions so she was now on top. He watched her as she moved slowly and confidently, using all her strength and dexterity. Over time, their rhythm accelerated, and Mike could not take his eyes off her face, which reflected strong emotions. They were completely immersed in the process, forgetting about everything around them. As their movements synchronized, they climaxed together, feeling incredible togetherness. Mike held Katie close to him, their breathing heavy but calm, like after a long and stressful day. Both were immersed in a state of complete peace. After that, Mike felt a familiar tiredness. He stood up, helped Katie into bed, and lay down next to her, covering them with the blanket. He held her close, feeling calm, although deep down he was aware that serious changes had occurred between them. His eyes began to close, and his last thought was, "I'm in big, big trouble." Mike woke up in complete silence. He felt a warm body wrap around him, and it took him a few minutes to remember everything that had happened. He would have cursed himself for his stupidity if the sex hadn't been so damn amazing. Katie suddenly raised her head. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her hair wasn't disheveled, except for what he'd done to it. He could make out her face in the light coming from the corridor. She was still Katie, only now she seemed more real than ever. He was inside her body. He was a man, and he wanted her again. Groaning internally, Mike pulled her towards him until her lips were next to his mouth and kissed her slowly and lazily. Katie didn't disappoint. She answered him, and soon Mike was horny again. He grabbed her hand and put it on himself, and she squeezed it, reassuringly. He rolled over, his hand sliding between her thighs. How is this possible, he thought, feeling despair. The ideal woman came into his life precisely at the moment when it was extremely difficult. He had been with Misty since they were at university, but they had only recently gotten married before moving to the area. Why didn't I meet her a month earlier, he thought bitterly. Desperate thoughts only made him more determined in the way he made love to her. She lay next to him, watching him sleep, studying him like never before. She had sexual experience since adolescence, but had not had anyone new in her life for a long time. Katie supposed she should have felt guilty for cheating on Phil, but to her surprise, it didn't even occur to her. She was with Mike, only with Mike. Was it considered cheating if her husband seemed content with her doing everything else with Mike? Mike kissed her ear again and whispered, "What are you thinking, Katie? Do you want to know what I'm thinking? I think you're perfect, that this is the most amazing sex I've ever had, and that I want to be inside you every moment. Which I can for the rest of my life." He pulled back, looking into her eyes while slowly thrusting into her. "I'm serious, Katie. I'll always want this." Katie raised her hands to his face, his glasses long since tossed aside. Each hand gently touched his cheeks. It was so sweet and touching that Mike's heart melted. She didn't take her eyes off him, and he couldn't tear himself away from her. They made love as naturally as they discussed art, books, or any of the countless other topics they broached in each other's company, as if it were the most important thing in the world. Her hands slid from his face to his back, her nails scratching his skin. Katie took a few minutes to catch her breath. She hugged Mike tightly, enjoying the weight of his body, his heavy breathing on her neck, his sweat on her skin. I think you're amazing. I think we're amazing. I'm still shocked by what we did, but I'm even more surprised that we didn't do it sooner. It feels so natural that I can't explain it. Maybe I'll feel guilty tomorrow, I don't know. But I don't think I'll ever regret it. I want you to. The night was a series of short moments of sleep, awakenings, lovemaking, whispers in the dark, and sleep again. They got to know each other's bodies, what they liked and what they didn't. In the morning, Katie took Mike to the shower, and there they made love again, warm water running down their skin, Katie's breasts pressed against the glass shower door. She felt pain between her legs, and muscles that she had forgotten existed ached, even though she constantly practiced yoga. It was exhausting, but she had never been happier. Mike was having breakfast with Katie on his lap. They took turns kissing, laughing, and feeding each other. Suddenly, Mike froze, looking up at this beautiful woman, hardly believing that at least part of her now belonged to him. Katie, I don't know what to say. I need to go home. We both need to think and decide what to do next. Katie became serious. Mike, I know what's going to happen next. You'll say it was a one-time thing. You have the perfect wife. She's tall, beautiful, smart, and she's a doctor after all. And I'm just a short guy with red hair. Well, village. Katie continued, well, look at me. I'm nothing compared to her. I know you liked it. I understand that. But would you want to be with me again? Seriously. Mike looked at her, stunned by her words, his mouth hanging open. Katie, I'm a man. I'll want you again. He kissed her, and again. Then another kiss on her nose, and again. He kissed her forehead, then her closed eyelids. I can't think clearly right now, too little sleep, and you're on my lap, looking so delicious. We need to think. We need to talk. We need to figure this out. Katie nodded slowly. I definitely need to do some laundry and then sleep. Maybe then I can think and talk. She smiled, stood up, and began putting dishes in the dishwasher. Mike came up from behind and hugged her, pressing himself against her body. I'll go now while I still can. Katie turned to kiss him, but he remained standing straight, refusing her that parting kiss. I'll talk to you later, Katie. With these words, he turned around and left her house. Mike crossed the street and approached his house. Ironically, his house was designed and built by Phil, Katie's husband. Mike tried not to think about it as he opened the garage door and walked inside. He looked into the garage itself. Misty's car was gone, which meant she actually spent the night in the hospital. I knew it, he muttered under his breath. He put down the keys and was ready to put the phone away, but suddenly looked at it in his hand and sighed. He swiped his finger across the screen and found the lock function. He'd never had to hide anything from Misty before, but that had apparently changed. And so it begins, he said to the empty room. Mike headed to the bedroom and began to undress, gathering his clothes as well as some from the hamper of dirty laundry, then headed to the laundry room to quickly start doing laundry. I didn't want to risk him smelling like Katie. Returning to the bedroom, he walked into the bathroom and took a quick shower. Stepping out of the shower, Mike looked at his body in the full-length mirror, trying to detect any signs that he had been having sex all night. He found nothing, which surprised him somewhat. They made love over and over again, and he thought, how can there be no trace of something so intense? He quickly dried himself off and put on his pajama pants, then returned to the bedroom to try to sleep. But sleep didn't come, so he got up again and sat down at his laptop. He needed to somehow express his feelings, and he began to write poetry. It was a short poem, the words poured out from his soul, and when he finished, he looked at it with a cold, objective gaze. Opening his email, he wrote a short message to Katie. Katie, I don't know what I'm feeling right now, but I want you to see it. Love, Mike. He attached the poem and pressed send. Then, completely exhausted, he fell onto the bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke up a few hours later, he felt human again. Misty was already in bed next to him, making that weird snoring noise she had when she was really tired. He stood up quietly, glad that the laptop was turned off. Damn, this won't be easy, he thought. Mike went into the kitchen and took out the ingredients for the salad. Quickly chopping vegetables and mixing them, he paid little attention to the food. His thoughts were occupied with other things. But he was a writer, and organizing thoughts was a common thing for him. First, he wants Katie again. As amazing as last night had been, it wasn't enough for him. He didn't know what enough would be, but the thought of just walking away and not going back to what they started was unacceptable. Second, his marriage was far from ideal. He must be honest with himself. Yes, he was such an asshole, that's true. No one was more surprised than himself when Misty picked him out of the crowd and started dating him. She was the woman he could only dream of touching during his school days. God, she was so determined. Her relentless pursuit of her goals, including her desire to make him her boyfriend, then her fiancé and husband, sometimes even frightened him with its intensity. She shone so brightly that it seemed to him that he might get burned next to her. He thought they would date for a while, but he never imagined it would go this far. That all changed when his family met her over the Christmas holidays during his senior year at university. Everyone liked her, especially his father. Mike had been used to disappointing his old man for most of his life. The youngest of 5 siblings, all of whom had MBAs and careers in business, he failed his studies at Northwestern University before taking a job at a state university and struggling to complete his English program. Misty was the first thing he could do to impress his father. It was nice. Mike thought he loved Misty. Now, after last night, he wasn't sure he'd ever truly understood what love was. Misty had never penetrated his soul the way Katie did, with her rolled-up newspaper and smile. After he finished eating the salad, he washed the bowl and cutlery. Left to his own devices, he could be a little scruffy. Misty was so clean, it was like a religion. Time has taught him to just clean up quickly and move on to the next thing. Misty will be fine with a clean bowl in the dryer. A dirty bowl in the sink would make her lose her temper the fastest. Except, Mike thought, except she finds out I'm sleeping with my best friend. Katie woke up later, with a fog in her head and a feeling of complete satisfaction that she couldn't quite pin down until it all came flooding back to her at once. Mike, inside her, was having sex with her so hard that she couldn't believe such a feeling was even possible. She got up, put on her gym clothes, and went to her yoga room. Turning on hypnotic music, she began to warm up, stretching her body. Phil set up several mirrors, and she critically examined her body while doing the usual set of poses. Well, Katie thought as she stretched, I cheated on my husband. The face of an adulteress looked back at her from the mirror. Phil built this yoga room for her with his own hands. True, they had little in common, but she had no reason to complain about him or their life together. They were quite happy and in harmony. Their sex life, while not a wild adventure, was still good. If someone had asked her moments before Mike made his move if there was anything missing in her marriage, she would have said no. Now that she had started the novel, she could point out a lot of little things. He worked hard. He did not hide his disdain for her passion for photography and other activities. He tolerated her yoga classes because it kept her body in good shape. He liked her cooking. Beyond that, she couldn't remember a single thing that he considered valuable about her. They got along well, but was that enough? Katie gracefully moved into the next position and moaned in pleasure as some of the tightness in her body began to release. The truth was that all this nerve-wracking might turn out to be nothing. Of course, Mike had said several times that he wanted her again, but right now he was at home with his wife. He could make love to her right now, and Katie couldn't do anything about it. For the first time in her life, Katie felt a tight knot in her stomach, which she mistook for jealousy. He could be having sex with Misty right now and decide I'm a waste of his time. Katie wasn't sure if she wanted to continue the affair, but she didn't want to be abandoned. After finishing her workout, she lay on the floor, covered in sweat, trying to clear her mind. She sat up and shook her head. Okay, I can't do this. I have to finish this before I do anything even stupider than I already did. Having made her decision, she reached for her phone and saw a message notification flashing on the screen. She swiped the screen and saw that Mike had sent her an email. She sighed. This is it. She read the contents and a smile slowly appeared on her face. Mike wrote her a poem. It was short, just a few lines. It talked about her eyes, comparing them to rays of light dancing on blue water on a calm lake. He told her a lot about his letter, but never showed her anything he wrote. Katie was well read enough to realize that he was talented. In an instant, Katie understood his true feelings. He was in it, and she realized she couldn't be the one to end it all. Katie went to the bathroom, undressed, and took a shower. When she finished, she put on a short terry robe and walked out to the front door to check her mail. Opening the door, she saw Mike, who was about to knock. "Oh, hi," Katie said stupidly, stunned by his appearance. Misty was called to the hospital. "I knew Phil was still away and decided we needed to talk about something," Mike said with a sincere look on his face. Mike was nervous but confident. He walked past her without asking permission to enter. Katie closed the door and started to turn around when she suddenly found herself pressed against it. His hands held her wrists above her head, and his tongue was already forcing its way into her mouth. She parted her lips, allowing his kiss to capture hers. Mike slowly opened his robe, as if giving himself time to process everything that was happening. He looked at Katie, and in his gaze there was something more than simple desire. An atmosphere filled with tension and anticipation hovered between them. Katie made no move to stop him, although there was something akin to doubt in her eyes. But this doubt quickly evaporated when she felt his touch warm, but restrained, as if he was afraid to break the thin border that separated them. Her body responded to these touches, and although slight discomfort was noticeable, it soon gave way to something else, a pleasant feeling of closeness and unity. Their breathing merged in the same rhythm, and this feeling filled her with inner warmth. She felt her tension gradually dissolve, giving way to something deeper, something that she had been waiting for a long time, although she did not fully realize it. Mike gently but confidently picked her up, as if their connection had become so natural that it didn't require words. They moved as one, their movements were synchronized, and even when he carried her to the sofa, it seemed like a continuation of what was happening between them. He laid her down gently, leaning down so their eyes met again. These glances contained everything: understanding, trust, passion that they could no longer contain. Every movement, every gesture was filled with special meaning. Mike didn't just touch her, he seemed to affirm this connection, make it tangible, real. Katie felt her body respond to these touches. She felt a strength and confidence in herself that she had never known before. Her arms wrapped tightly around his shoulders, and she tried to maintain her balance, not out of fear, but out of a desire to be even closer to him. They moved together, and this moment was the culmination of all those days and nights they had spent thinking about their feelings. Katie realized that this was not just physical intimacy, it was an act of togetherness, a confirmation of their inner connection. She heard how their breathing became more and more frequent, how their hearts beat in the same rhythm. Her body trembled with pleasure, and her thoughts were confused, plunging her into a whirlpool of emotions. When the tension reached its peak, Katie couldn't help herself and allowed herself to completely surrender to this moment. Her voice, breaking into a scream, was an expression of everything she felt. And this moment became a revelation for her, a revelation that she found in this man something more than just physical attraction. Mike, feeling her response, could no longer restrain himself either. His breathing became uneven, and his hands held her tightly. After this climactic moment, he remained next to her for some time, as if he did not want to let this moment go. When it was over, he gently turned her towards him, their eyes meeting again. At that moment, an understanding arose between them that did not require words. He carefully picked her up and, with special care, carried her to the bedroom where they had rested last night. Silence enveloped them, and there was something peaceful in this silence, as if the world around them had temporarily stopped. Sitting next to her in bed, Mike held her close to him. He took a strand of her hair and played with it, smiling at her cute face. "I know we need to talk, but can I just say that you are incredible?" Katie blushed incredibly. "I don't know that anyone has ever said that to me," she kissed him shyly. "I almost decided to finish everything when I received your poem." She bit her lip and lowered her eyes for a moment. "But now, after what happened again, I just can't." I can't be the person to let you go. Mike hugged her tightly. We're at a dead end, he muttered. I don't know how and what we will do next, but we will figure it out. He sighed, burying his face in her hair. I can't let you go either. Misty's heels clicked on the cold tiles of the office of her neighbor who ran a construction business. He must be doing well, she thought. She expected to see a construction trailer surrounded by men in hard hats and dirt everywhere. However, everything here was professional, well-groomed and elegant. A polite secretary was sitting at the computer, quickly typing something on the keyboard. She smiled and said, You must be Dr. Fairley. My boss is already waiting for you. She stood up and walked to the large door at the end of the room and opened it, inviting Misty into Phil's office. Phil was on the phone and motioned that he would be there in a minute. The secretary left and Misty placed her large bag on the chair next to her. She walked over to the wall and began looking at photographs of Phil's projects. She recognized her area. It turns out that Phil built almost all the houses in the area. We must give him his due. These were not the faceless boxes typical of such areas. The houses were unique and had character, but still worked well together. She really liked her area, it had charm. Unfortunately, Katie also lived there, which is why she ended up here. She smoothed out her skirt and sat down. Misty never dressed too sexy. She was too professional for that. However, she liked beautiful things, and she liked to have money to afford luxurious tastes. Work hard and get rewarded was her motto. Phil finally ended the call and smiled at Misty. Hello, neighbor. What brings you here? I was surprised by your call. Are there problems with the house? Misty chuckled. I wish that was the problem, Phil. Let me be clear. I am a busy and driven woman. I leave nothing to chance. I immediately realized that your wife was ready for cheating as soon as I met her. She spends too much time at home, with her head in the clouds. Such women spread their legs faster than open a bouquet of flowers. Phil opened his mouth in surprise. Sorry. Misty took a folder out of her bag and threw it on the table in front of Phil. Several photographs fell out. Phil grabbed one of them. His jaw dropped when he recognized his wife. The photo was of her outside, naked, pressed against a tree, and Mike was having sex with her. What the? They're having sex, Phil, Misty said bluntly. Everything is here. Hotels, hiking routes, picnics by the lake. They even had sex in a canoe, which was very difficult to photograph, believe me. Misty glanced briefly at her nails. Misty looked at her nails as if giving Phil time to process what he had seen. She knew what would happen next. This damn bitch. Phil's face flushed red, and he punched the photograph with all his might, as if he could punish the couple in this way. I'll divorce her so quickly that she won't have time to come to her senses. Let him know what it's like to live without my money. Misty looked at him patiently, like he was a child who didn't understand what was happening. How long have you been married, Phil? Phil thought for a moment. 12 years, he finally answered. They got married early, but Phil found the one and saw no point in delaying it. Katie was beautiful, an excellent cook, and showed no signs of stopping taking care of herself as she got older. She was a valuable asset to him, at least until today. Misty blew on her nails, as if giving him time to process everything. So, Phil, we live in a state with division of property. Were you as successful 12 years ago, and were you smart enough to negotiate a prenuptial agreement? Phil's eyes widened in horror. Oh shit, oh God. He jumped up, then sat back down, stood up again, and sank back down into the chair. But she cheated on me. She can't just go and... Half, Misty finished for him, and we live in a no-fault divorce state. The judge won't care if she slept with the entire football team. She has been your wife for over 10 years. You earn much more than she does. She will get half of your assets, plus alimony. You'll be writing checks to her for years to come. This stupid, empty-headed bitch. Phil continued to swear. He looked at Misty. You're a doctor. You don't need Mike's money. What are you going to do? Misty snorted. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She stood up and leaned towards his desk. My father-in-law is Matthew Fairley. Phil opened his mouth again in surprise. The same Matthew Fairley, billionaire? Misty nodded. Exactly. I couldn't believe my luck when I met Michael in college. He had just flown out of Northwestern and was studying English. Who the hell chooses English anyway? He was handsome and good in bed, but I considered it just a temporary hobby until I realized that he was from the Fairley family. She leaned toward Phil again, her breasts straining against the fabric of her expensive dress. Michael has a trust fund that could buy your business many times over. And unlike you, Matthew Fairley is a smart and prudent man. He made me sign a prenuptial agreement. If I leave for any reason, I will lose access to the Fairley family money. I have plans, big plans. I'm going to win the Nobel Prize before I finish my career. I'll save a lot of lives, and I won't let my plans be ruined because Michael suddenly decided he was in love with your dim-witted wife. Misty walked around the table and sat on the edge next to Phil's chair. I know this is all hard to take in, Phil. I understand that you feel betrayed. I feel the same way myself. Her face became softer. She looked at him the way a doctor might who inspires confidence in his patients. But we can't let our emotions ruin everything we've achieved. And what else can we achieve? Phil covered his face with his hands. His life, which he considered ideal 15 minutes ago, was crumbling before his eyes. He wasn't always faithful to Katie, but what man was? However, his infidelities were limited to one-time affairs and one-night stands. He had never had a regular affair, and certainly not with his neighbor. What will people say? He started crying. Misty pulled the crying man close to her, placing his head in her lap. She spread her legs slightly, giving him more space between them. "It's okay, Phil, it's okay," she whispered, stroking his head. "We can be each other's support. We can help each other get through this." Phil looked at her, his face red and covered in tears. "Wait, how?" Misty looked at him with cunning in her eyes. Misty smiled flirtatiously. "Seems like they owe us, don't they?" She pulled him closer, and her tongue slid out to lick his lips. Phil didn't hesitate. He grabbed Misty and pulled her towards him. His hands quickly pulled the zipper of her dress down and pulled it down to her waist as his mouth ravished her greedily. She was wearing skimpy, flesh-colored underwear underneath her dress, and he quickly discarded her bra, allowing her ample breasts to slip into his large, rough hands. She gasped as he squeezed them roughly. "I'll have sex with you properly," he growled in her ear. Misty stood at the table, feeling the tension build between them. Phil wasted no time in moving closer and touching her, confidently and powerfully. Her dress rode up slightly as his hands touched her waist, pulling her closer. She felt the warmth of his body and a rush of passion piercing every moment. Phil was completely absorbed in the moment. He quickly threw off formal boundaries. His movements became more intense, but not rough. She responded to his passion, their bodies moving in unison. She knew that this game between them was more than just physical attraction. She closed her eyes, her breathing became rapid. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapped tightly around her. Misty at that moment was ready to surrender to her feelings, completely immersed in what was happening. There were no words in their communication, only silent understanding. Phil looked at her, his eyes reflecting the same passion as hers. Everything around them seemed to disappear, and they were left alone with this moment, allowing their feelings to take over. He stood up and zipped up. He offered his hand to Misty, and she sat up, reaching for her bra. While they were getting dressed, they both tried to catch their breath and collect their thoughts. "Well," Phil finally said, "what now?" Misty looked at him. "You go home and have sex with your wife. Take a romantic trip. Get her out of town while I take care of Michael. We can't let their stupidity ruin everything." Phil nodded slowly. Yes, that's what needs to be done." He looked at Misty and smiled. "How the hell did Mike get it into his head that he liked my boring wife better than what you just gave me?" Misty raised a well-groomed eyebrow. "Who said he ever got what you just got?" She leaned over and kissed him. "We are all different with different people. Some inspire me more than others." She jumped off the table, found her shoes, put them back on, and smoothed her hair. "And there's no reason why you can't have it again. We just have to be more careful than they are. Michael is too stupid to hire a private investigator, but his father isn't. She shuddered. Matthew fairly frightened her, although he excited her at the same time. So much brute force in one man. She grabbed the folder and put it back in her bag. I'll take these. If you ever decide you need them, of course I'll share them with you. She froze. But before you make that decision, remember that we both have something to lose. Phil nodded slowly. I promise. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.